Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I wanted to talk to you today about ranking pharmacy schools for residency. That is, as a pre-pharmacy advisor, I have to give the students the best information about which school to go to. And one of the questions they ask is, well, what are the chances of me getting a residency? And that's partially good. I can say, okay, well, this is the top school in the country, so you can just fly there, and if you can get in, and have all the money in the world, then you can pay for that. But what usually happens is that it's a conversation about, well, what's the best school I can get into for the least amount of money? And when you put that together, you have to do things a little bit differently. So the document I'm going to talk about is at residency.teachable.com. Go into the Extreme LOI Makeover course, and then there's a lot of free stuff there. So you just kind of scroll down and go into course curriculum. And under free resources, you'll find the Excel spreadsheet that I'm using. So the first thing, let me kind of go into that Excel spreadsheet, talk a little bit about what's going on with pharmacy schools and the number of applicants and things like that, because that's kind of one of the most important things that you need to know. So applications are up last year about 2%. Privates are down in the aggregate 6%, and publics are up 8%. But don't let that fool you, because whether you're public or private, the range goes from down 30% to up 70%. So an amazing difference between them. But just to let you know that applications are up, so we expect that it's going to continue to be difficult to get a residency. I'll talk about this document a little bit later, but what I've done is kind of created a method that allows you to use both the tuition you paid, not the tuition that's published, but the tuition that you individually paid, and then to also use the match rates and things like that. But let me show you how to use a couple of things, because it does get a little bit complicated. So let's talk about where you can actually find the match stats, so ASHP match stats. And you go down here, and then down here is last year's 2021 combined Phase 1 and Phase 2 PGY1. And I'm only going to focus on PGY1 now. Maybe I can do PGY2 a little bit later, but it's much different because PGY2 relates more to what PGY1 you did rather than anything else. So you would go in here, you'd click on that, and you'd get this Word document, or you'd get this PDF. Okay, and so here's the PDF, and it's in alphabetical order by state, which is a little bit goofy because that's not really helpful for us. So what I do is I use some magic with PDF, software and stuff like that, and I turn it into an Excel file because that's going to be a lot more useful to me. And so now I have the exact same thing in an Excel file where I've put these alphabetically listed schools. Now what I do is I take to get this, and I probably should enlarge this part just because it's going to be so important. Matched is a term that schools use to talk about the people that were active with the list. That is, they got through the interview, they were interviewed, and then what percent of them matched. I also like to use what I call a wanted, which is to take the number that registered. Maybe some of them got retail jobs, but most of the time they just didn't get an interview. And that rate is around 62%, so a little bit lower. You can also make an interview rate if you really want to. And to do that, and I'll show you how to do it, you would take, so you go equal sum, and then we would take, the interview rate would be E2 over D2, so the number that registered and number that got the interview, so about 90%, and then we can kind of, and what I like to do is I like to format it into a percentage, and we don't need those two decimal places, but basically if you're looking at the top school, because it's the first alphabetically, so the Auburn University Harrison School of Pharmacy, about 90% of the students that applied for a residency received an interview. About 68 or 69% that got the interview, went on to match. And then of the people that started out saying, I want to do a residency, I actually paid the money, registered for the process, about 2 out of 3 or 62% got it. And that's a pretty decent deal. But the question is that a good deal? Well, if you paid $250,000 for it, or you paid $50,000 for it, when I'm just talking about tuition, I'm not even making it so complicated as to put in quality or the cost of living, because it's going to cost a lot more to live in Los Angeles or New York than it certainly is to live in Alabama. But what I'm saying is that, okay, well, let's at least give someone who's pre-pharmacy and is interested in this school a way to kind of compare schools. And what many people will do is actually stay within the state. So let's say, well, the average pharmacy student actually, or pre-pharmacy student, only applies to between 2 and 3 schools. It's like 2.6 schools per person. So that means that maybe they would apply to Auburn and maybe they would apply to Samford. And what they could do is they could look at these and say, all right, well, really, they're not terribly different. 63% versus 68%, 62, and then 50%, so not quite as many people, I'm going to guess, got the interview. We can just kind of fill this down. Yeah, so about 4 out of 5 got an interview from Samford, 9 out of 10 from Auburn. And the reason for this difference a lot of times has to do with some of the materials that they've created. So, the way to fix the interview part of things to increase this number is to do a much better job with the letter of intent, to do a much better job getting the right recommendations and counseling them on recommendations, getting the right APPEs, those types of things. And that's going to get you from registered to active. Active to matched is actually your interview skill, which is a completely different thing. And if you're going to, focus on something as a school, you want to kind of, as a dean or whatever, you want to take a look and say, okay, well, were my students struggling with the interview, or were they struggling just getting the interview in the first place? And if I was dean at, Samford, I would say, okay, well, my students seem to have the interview part of this down. Let's take the time to really work on the writing process. And then for Auburn, it might be the opposite, where they say, okay, well, there's maybe some of the interviews that could have gone a little bit better. Maybe we can structure APPEs in such a way that we have longitudinal APPEs, so they build a stronger relationship with certain hospitals and certain centers and things like that. A lot of things they can do at a pharmacy school, but that's really kind of not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is, kind of how to create this for yourself. So what I did was I already kind of did it, but the way that you would do it is you highlight it, and then you sort and filter, and you do a custom sort, and you sort by column. If I want to sort by column H, I would do it like that, and then I do largest to smallest. I'm only doing largest to smallest because I don't want to embarrass the schools that do have those low match rates for whatever reason. So when we look at this is what a school would actually call a match rate. So the match rate, or this is ordered by match rate. And I'll show you it's not terribly different when you change it to wanted, but it is a little bit different. So when we look at the match rates at UNC, we see that the match rate was around 93%, but 102 actually registered for the match. So 84% of those got a match. So it's really kind of up to you which one you want to use. But I think you'll find it surprising what the top 10 are. And again, remember, we're skipping down to number 2, so we're actually going 2 to 11. But number 1 in terms of match rate is UNC. Number 2 is Oklahoma. Number 3 is Union. Number 4 is Michigan. Number 5 is Wyoming. Number 6 is Wilkes-Barre. Number 7 is Rutgers. Number 8 is Rhode Island. Number 9 is UCSD, and number 10 is Kentucky, 11 Wisconsin, 12 Drake, and I could go on and on. And when you look at U.S. News and World Report, I assure you that many of those schools are not on there. So what we want to do is, if I have a student that says I want to do a residency, well, the U.S. News and World Report rankings are really not only irrelevant, but they're actually misleading. That they're going to a good school, but they're not going to a good school for what they want, which is to earn a pharmacy residency. Now, to be fair, if you are in a smaller school with fewer applicants, they tend to have higher rates. It just is something that is that way. But let's look at the wanted, because it does change it a little bit. When you go from, just not, instead of going from the people that got the interview to the people that were going to interview, Oklahoma actually becomes the best school in the country to go to if you are looking for a residency. Then UNC, Michigan, and now Kentucky moves from 10th to 4th. Okay, so Union, Wisconsin moves from 11th to 7th. Rhode Island moves up a little bit. Then Lipscomb makes this out of Nashville. Pitt, Concordia in Wisconsin, and then Drake rounds it out at 11, and then Cincinnati at 12, Purdue, and so forth. And so when you're looking at the match rates versus the wanted, this means that these students not only had a high interview rate, but once they got to the interview, they did really, really well. So I prefer to use this list. That's my personal feeling, but obviously if you're a school that it makes your rankings go down, I can see how you would want to use the other list. But this is what I would want to do with that document, and what I have to do with that document when somebody says, hey, there's a couple colleges of pharmacy in the state, which one would be the best? So this is the first part, is getting the matched and the wanted, and then you can even get the interview numbers if you wanted something like that. But here's where I get a little bit clever, and this document is at residency.teachable.com. So let me show you where that is. So residency.teachable.com is my platform where I work one-on-one with students on their letters of intent. CV is not really my favorite thing, and then I do offer now helping with interviews. If you just want to really learn about the point system, I've got 3 hours of content that is nowhere else on that Rockstar Residency interview prep and support. If you want my one-on-one help, that's $300 per half hour. So that's just maybe a dozen people take advantage of that over the year. But the extreme LOI makeover is where this extra stuff is. So you got to scroll down, and then you'll go to the free resources, and you should be able to preview it and then download it. Okay, so here's the document, and I'm going to show you how it works. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken the range of, and let's actually make this a little bit bigger and make it a little bit easier to see. Okay, and we'll go down to wanted rate because it's just kind of what you want to use. But let's look at this for right now. So the tuition range going from in-state in Montana, which is about $56,000, and I just rounded down to 50 to make it easy to have these kind of aggregations. And then the highest is around $250,000, where you're kind of going to Southern Cal, I think, is about $64,000 a year. I think in terms of tuition and fees is about the highest that I've seen. Maybe there's more. I know that some of the 3-year schools might have more because they do 3 years instead of 4. And yeah, you can say, okay, well, you get out a year earlier. So, how do you account for that? I'm just trying to give some kind of way for a student to have a ballpark idea of how to compare two schools. So at first you would say, okay, well, I saw UNC was at the very top. That's the school I want to go to. But the problem with UNC is that my understanding is, at least for undergraduates, that the law requires that only 15% of students at UNC may be from out of state, which means that you might not be able to get that. And then I've got, UNC in-state, Auburn in-state, Montana in-state. Can't be in-state at 3 different states. So we'll kind of get to that. All right, so the first thing I did is I took the tuition from $50,000 to $250,000, and each time I bump up by $20,000. So there's 10 different, tiers, and then you get 100 points for a $50,000 tuition. So we're talking about Montana, and then you get 0 points for spending $250,000 at Southern Cal. Now, what I'm saying is, don't put the sticker tuition though, because a student at Southern Cal might get, and I know that there are significant scholarships available there, might only be paying $130,000. So instead of ranking the school, what we want to rank is the student within the school. So as a student comes to me and says, hey, I've got these, the 3 schools that I've applied to, that would be, a little above the average. And these are the 3 schools. And this is how much it's actually going to cost me to get to each school. Oh, okay. So now we have enough information to make a better judgment, or to at least give them the information. I don't make the judgment. I just give them the information. And so we look at it and we say, okay, well, one school got my total tuition down to 150,000. One school is going to be 190,000, and another is 70,000. But the match rates are going to be different. Okay. So what I've done is I've said, okay, well, what's the top match rate? Top match rate is around 90% if you're talking about, UNC. It's actually like 87, but just to make the numbers reasonable. And then the lowest match rate is 20%. I won't mention the school. You can look up the numbers yourself. So we really have a range from 90 to 20, and so I used about 7%. So for every each 20,000, it's another 7% or whatever. So what I did was I said, okay, let's say I've got a student that went to Montana and they get 100 points for tuition, and then we look at their match rate and we see that their match rate is actually around 79%, so somewhere between 80 and 95. So, we can give them an 85, that's fine. So they would get a 185 for that in total points. And that's about the top tier. So Montana in-state is probably the best deal in the country in terms of getting the best return on investment for your in-state tuition dollars. Okay. But again, you could be somebody that is at a different school getting similar, tuition for each year. So let's look at a different school, and let's now take it to, we'll put no fill there, and let's go to Auburn. So Auburn is right around $93,000 for in-state, so we'll give them the 80 points for that. And then their match rate was right around 69%. So that would be, oops, I did that wrong. It should be like this. Okay, that's why it was goofy. All right, so the 90,000 tuition, 80 tuition points, and then there's 69, so we give them 70 match points. And so they get about 150, which puts them just out of that top 20%. And in terms of, their national ranking, I think they're in the top 25%. So I'm actually giving them a little bit of a boost, saying that they're right around 21% in terms of residency. So if you were to rank, the schools or whatever, it would be around that. And then UNC, which you say, oh, wow, that's the best school in the country in terms of match rate. Well, the tuition is a little bit higher. You want to say it's somewhere between, I want to say it's $100,000 in state for the 4 years. And so you make that a 75 for the tuition points. And then, of course, the match rate is very tops in the country, so 100 points for that. And so they get 175 points. And so that might be a little bit unexpected that, UNC with the top in the country is maybe not the best for the person if they're from Montana. Now, this also takes into account what would happen if, let's say we have a UNC student, but they're coming from California. And so a California student, for whatever reason, says, I don't want to go to UCSF and the California schools. I want to go to North Carolina. They get in. And let's say they have to pay $30,000 a year for tuition. So, multiply that by, and then it's closer to 130. And so they would only get 60 points. Okay, so that would make it a 160 on my kind of scale here. And that still keeps it in top 20%, but not the very top tier. Okay. And let's say for whatever reason, someone from North Carolina wants to go to UCSF. And UCSF is somewhere right around between 76 and 83% with the match, though it was a bit lower this year because I think they have like the two classes merging or something goofy with the 3-year and 4-year program. And so you could do the same thing. So the whole point of this is, as somebody who is going into the match, you want to know, well, did I get a good deal? Did I do a good job in terms of figuring out, what it is? And, if you paid $250,000 and, you're, and you got a, 90, whatever it is, like an 83% match rate, then, oops, this would go like this. Then you're probably not in the best situation. 45 would put you, kind of between this 8th and 9th tier. So the less you spend, obviously the better. But the question is what did $250,000 mean to you? For some families, that's a rounding error, and it's just not a big deal. They just wanted to go to this school, and they wanted to live in this place. And if you count your parents paying for it as the tuition paid, that you didn't even pay that tuition. And I was very fortunate. My parents paid for my 3 years of pre-pharmacy. It took a little longer, and then the first or did they pay for first and second year? Yeah, first and second year of pharmacy school tuition. So I was really, just only having to pay. I think I graduated with $40,000 in loans total, but that was a long time ago. But this is a way to do it. Now we can do the same thing with the wanted rate, but the scale changes a little bit, where instead you're looking at changes of about 7.5%. So the worst in the country, somewhere around 9% got in. I just rounded up to 10. And then the best in the country is around 86% got in that registered. And then obviously the tuitions don't change. The best in the country is $50,000. The most expensive in the country is $250,000. But that's again sticker rate. And especially with the privates, I know that many private schools give tuition breaks. So if you're somebody who went to school at a school that has, maybe a 69% match rate, and you got scholarships and you only paid $70,000, then you're kind of getting to the point of being close to the very top tier. So that's kind of a way to do it. And, I know that recently Philadelphia College of Pharmacy reduced their tuition significantly. And then just now I saw UT Tyler drop their tuition. I want to say it was like $10,000, but I guess I could just pause this recording. Yeah, it was $151,000 in 21-22, and now it's $108,000 from 22-23 is the new one. And I think that's actually what we're going to see. I know a recent podcast episode talked about closing schools. I think what's first going to happen is there's going to be a tuition fight, if you want to call it that, and then you would kind of go from there. But let's kind of go back to this sheet. So anyway, what I encourage you to do is to figure out, what was your tuition for all of your years of pharmacy school. And if you want to do this where you say, okay, well, I'm a student who's going to a 3-year school and I didn't have to pay and I'm going to make X number of dollars, I would take the after-tax dollars and say, okay, well, after taxes, I would make $75,000. Or whatever it is. And, you can take that from tuition paid to see if it works out right. But this is what I really needed to do was to create a way that I can speak intelligently with pre-pharmacy students to make sure that they know, how to compare apples to apples in terms of residency. Now, there are other things. If you just want the cheapest school to get the degree and to move on to a community position, or maybe entry-level hospital that's extremely difficult, then that might be a choice. So again, questions for me, TonyThePharmacist@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer them.